I'm Nima Rajan. There were more than 6,300 new confirmed COVID-19 cases nationwide on Monday and another 40 reported deaths. Hotspot Ontario logged over 2,700 new infections. Alberta reported nearly 1,600 new cases and still holds the country's highest active case rate of 575 per 100,000 people. Manitoba logged 502 new infections, with Premier Brian Pallister admitting that efforts to keep a third wave from hitting the province have failed. Meanwhile, the country's top doctor, Theresa Tam, says Canada is closely watching for the results of a study in the United Kingdom on mixing COVID-19 vaccine doses. Her comments come as Ontario joins other provinces in likely plans to mix vaccine brands ahead of a flood of Pfizer and Moderna shots arriving in Canada this week. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said every COVID-19 vaccine available in the country is safe and effective, and everyone should get the first shot available to them. A new poll about COVID-19 vaccinations suggests a majority of Canadians support the idea of vaccine passports, but mostly for travel-related purposes. The online survey found almost two-thirds of respondents backed the idea of vaccine passports, and three-quarters are likely to get one as soon as they've been inoculated. However, there is far more support for the use of passports for domestic and international travel than for the idea of using them for everyday activities. New Democrats and Liberals have united to cut short initial debate on a bill to ensure an election, should there be one, could be held safely during the pandemic. The bill C-19 will now be put to a second reading vote and then referred to a House of Commons committee for greater scrutiny and potential amendments. It prompted loud protests from Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois. They're accusing the minority Liberal government of gagging MPs and short-circuiting democracy on a bill meant to protect it. Doctors and nurses on the front lines of our healthcare system are upset that the federal Liberals appear to have put their promise of a national PHARMACARE program on the back burner. When the Trudeau government delivered its first federal budget in 2 years last month, it included more than $100 billion in new spending over the next 3 years. But the lone mention of PHARMACARE in the document only restated a 2019 commitment of $500 million for a national program for high-cost drugs for rare diseases. Federal Privacy Commissioner Daniel Therian says his office is looking into the pornography site Pornhub and its Montreal-based parent company MINDGEEK over potential privacy breaches related to exploitive, underage, and non-consensual content posted online. The probe comes after testimony from women who say Pornhub brushed off their pleas to have these videos taken down. More than 100 victims of exploitive content and scores of lawmakers have also called for a full criminal investigation into MINDGEEK. The federal government is launching a basket of programs to bolster airports with hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, first announced back in November. Ottawa has laid out the criteria for airports to access $740 million in capital investments over the next 6 years. Nearly $500 million of that windfall is bound for large airports to put toward critical infrastructure, such as runway repairs and transit stations. Most of the remainder funding will go to smaller airports. Canada's Correctional Service says it is reviewing a report that has found shortcomings with the process intended to serve as a check on new units for isolating federal prisoners from the jail's general population. Recently introduced structured intervention units are intended to allow better access to programming and mental health care. Experts say mandated case reviews for isolated inmates are inadequate. MPs want to grill Justice Minister David Lametti and Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault on how a change to the Broadcasting Act could affect individual rights to free expression. The Heritage Committee is calling for the ministers to appear sometime this week. Work has been stalled since Liberal MPs on the committee moved to cut a section of Bill C-10 that excludes user-generated content from regulation. Critics warn that the change could erode the rights of individual users who upload content to social media. Giant Tiger says it plans to add more than 40 new stores across the country as demand for discount products surges amid the pandemic. The Canadian discount chain says that it will increase its total to 300 stores from its current 259 locations. Paul Wood, Giant Tiger's president and CEO, says the new stores will be based on value and opportunity. Retail analysts say Giant Tiger offers a more convenient layout than a big box store, but a wider selection than a dollar store. All right, stay with us. After the break, we dig deeper into the ongoing violence between Israel and Hamas and what Canadians and Canada can do to help. An interview with Mr. Avi Benlolo, national award-winning expert in the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, human rights, and Israel, coming up after the break. This story and more national and international news coming up today on the Forum Daily. So don't go away. We'll be right back, everyone. Israel's military has responded to Gaza militants firing more than 250 rockets toward Israel, injuring 6 Israeli civilians. And the number of rockets in the air have been increasing throughout the day. The country unleashed airstrikes on militant targets in Gaza, hitting the high-rise home of a Hamas field commander and 2 border tunnels dug by militants. Meanwhile, Hamas and other armed groups continue to fire dozens of rockets toward Israel. The escalation early today was sparked by weeks of tensions in contested Jerusalem. As the fighting continues between the two regions, a top human rights advocate is calling for Canada and the European Union to stand with Israel. Avi Benlolo says although Canada has released a statement regarding this escalation, Canada needs to denounce Palestinian violence and the injuries sustained by the Israeli police services. Mr. Avi Benlolo, national award-winning expert in the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, human rights, and Israel, joins us now on Forum Daily. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
So can you provide some context for this particular conflict, sir, and what sparked the latest violence?
Look, this has been heating up for some time, and I believe that both Hamas in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority, and many extremists in Israel itself have been looking for some kind of excuse to go and to start a mini intifada, if you will. And so it started at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where you had Palestinian rioters start throwing rocks and stones and Molotov cocktails at Israeli police officers and restricting ordinary citizens of all faiths from walking through and worshiping. And so, of course, Israeli police tried to calm down the situation. But that ignited and inflamed the situation even more so. And following that, Hamas saw this as an excuse and a reason to start battering Israel and its citizens with rockets. And the rockets are not small-grade rockets. These are very serious armaments that have been deployed and supported and sent to the Gaza Strip by Iran. And they're being now fired. Some estimates are about 600 rockets to date have been fired into Israel, into civilian population centers by Hamas. And as we all know, that is a war crime. It's against the Geneva Convention.
Now, digging deeper into the background of this, we know there are reports about territorial disputes in the Old City. So can you help our Canadian viewers better understand the tension from both sides?
Look, yes, there's always territorial disputes, and Israel has been attempting to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority for many years, as we all know, for over 2 decades, closer to 3, in fact, about setting up an independent, peaceful Palestinian state. The Palestinian Authority has refused all Israeli overtures to have its own state. And the problem with the Palestinians in general in the area is, in fact, they themselves are divided into 2 entities. You have Hamas, that is occupying the Gaza Strip, and that is a banned terrorist groups. Canada bans this group. America bans this group. It is a known terrorist group that is occupying the Gaza Strip. And then you have the world community is seen as a more legitimate group, the Palestinian Authority, which is in the West Bank. And so they themselves don't see eye to eye. They can't come to an agreement. And both are hostile to the state of Israel and to having a peace agreement with the state of Israel, which is something that Israel wants to do. And so on every occasion, in every situation, you've got these extremists that are trying to advance their cause, launching rockets, violence, terror attacks. There was a young 19-year-old Jewish student who was murdered by Palestinians just last week. And so, it's a really sad situation. And the reason, Canada is a strong ally with Israel. Israel is a democratic state. And I strongly believe that Canada itself and the Western community can deflate the extremism by standing with Israel, and for the extremists to understand that they're on the wrong side of history.
So what is at risk here if there is no intervention or response by international leaders, sir? About 30 seconds left.
It's going to lead to a war. Simple. Israel is much stronger. Israel, of course, is restraining itself. Hamas is asking for those pictures, that will inevitably end up in the Western media and slam Israel. But Israel will have no choice but to respond and quiet down the situation.
All right, sir, we've got about 10 seconds left. But quickly, is there anything our Canadian viewers can do to add their voices to this issue?
Yeah, look through the bias in the Canadian media. Stand up for Israel. Israel is an ally, a democracy, and is certainly defending itself in this uncalled for attack.
It was a violent and deadly weekend as ongoing gang conflict grips BC's Lower Mainland. A 19-year-old man was shot and killed and a bystander injured in Burnaby on Saturday. A brazen daylight shooting Sunday just outside Vancouver's International Airport's departure terminal left a 28-year-old man dead. The RCMP says the violence is part of a war over the illicit drug market. Authorities are still searching for at least 2 suspects who shot at police from their vehicle, striking the cruiser but not the officer. Alberta's Justice Minister is defending the province's new health restrictions by saying a COVID-19 disaster is what the provincial opposition, the federal government, and the media were looking for and want. Casey Madhu made the comments Friday on Facebook, adding an overrun healthcare system would leave patients grasping for breath in field hospitals. Mr. Madhu's spokesman declined to explain the minister's comments, but added that Mr. Madhu won't apologize for stating the obvious. A Southern Alberta university is using a contest with prizes, including free tuition this fall, to encourage students to get COVID-19 vaccinations. The University of Lethbridge says vaccinations won't be mandatory for students attending the school in the fall, but officials say they wanted to provide a positive, encouraging message to those hesitant about vaccines. Students who get vaccinated before September 9th will be eligible to win one of 9 grand prizes, one being full tuition this fall. The CEO of the Pharmacy Association of Saskatchewan says some people are getting on COVID-19 vaccine wait lists at several different pharmacies and then taking the first shot they can get. Don Martin says that's a completely fine thing to do, but it does lead to some logistical issues for the pharmacies to work through. So far, pharmacies haven't had much trouble finding other people to fill those slots, but Ms. Martin asks anyone who has booked appointments at multiple pharmacies to make sure they cancel extra appointments once they get a shot. A weekend blaze that firefighters say burnt thousands of railway ties in Manitoba is under investigation. Portage La Prairie Fire Department Chief Phil Carpenter says the fire was fully involved when they arrived at the scene early Sunday, and the Cartier Fire Department was called in for help. It took about 12 hours before the fire was out. No injuries were reported. Toronto's Board of Health is calling on the province to reopen outdoor recreational amenities that were shut down when the current stay-at-home order went into effect. Board Chairman Joe Cressy says people need ways to get outside and enjoy the outdoors safely. The government's science advisors have criticized the restriction of outdoor activities, saying they will not control COVID-19 and disproportionately harm children and those who don't have access to their own green space. Ontario has unveiled 2 new programs aimed at labour shortages in agriculture. Agriculture Minister Ernie Hardman announced the initial funding projects in its agri-food labour strategy yesterday. One project will see more than $617,000 go to an Ontario Federation of Agriculture job matching platform with virtual career fairs, webinar series and training programs. The other will send $195,000 to Food and Beverage Ontario for a strategy to address issues like attracting and retaining workers. Elections New Brunswick has announced that it will provide live streaming video of the vote tabulation process of province-wide election results on May 25th. New Brunswickers in most of the province voted yesterday for Municipal Council, District Education Council, and Regional Health Authority board elections. Chief Electoral Officer Kim Poffenroth says providing a live stream video feed as results are extracted from the tabulation machines will provide transparency of the process. Well, as new COVID-19 border restrictions take effect in Nova Scotia, the province's premier says he wasn't trying to put new homeowners from out of province in limbo. Currently, only permanent residents of Nova Scotia and people traveling for essential reasons can enter the province. Ian Rankin says people recently buying a home in the province can apply for an exception if they can show that an offer to buy a house was accepted on or before April 21st and the closing date is on or before May 20th. All 4 Atlantic provinces reported new infections Monday, with Nova Scotia logging 121 new cases as its province-wide lockdown nears the 2-week mark. Nova Scotia closed its provincial boundaries to non-essential travel yesterday until the end of the month to try to limit the spread of the virus. Meantime, New Brunswick has moved the only part of the province that has been under the orange alert level of its COVID-19 response plan back down to yellow at midnight, allowing some restrictions to ease. All right, a look at what's making news around the world coming up next, as a colonial pipeline in the U.S. is expected to be restored by the end of the week. Meanwhile, the FDA approved the PFIZER-BIONTECH vaccine for kids as young as 12 years old, and Iran opens registration for presidential candidates. These stories and more news from around the world coming up next. Stay right here with us on the Forum Daily. We'll be right back, everyone. The operator of a major U.S. fuel pipeline hit by a cyber attack last week is hoping to have services mostly restored by the weekend, as the FBI and Biden administration officials identified the culprits as a gang of criminal hackers. U.S. officials sought to soothe the concerns about price spikes or damage to the economy by stressing that the fuel supply has not experienced widespread disruptions. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm says the attack demonstrates how utterly vulnerable the U.S. is to cyber attacks on American infrastructure. Washington is expanding the use of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine to children as young as 12. The Food and Drug Administration says the shot is safe and offers strong protection for young teens. Shots could begin once a federal vaccine panel issues recommendations for using the vaccine in 12 to 15-year-olds. Vaccinating children of all ages will be critical to a return to normalcy. Most vaccines rolling out worldwide have been authorized for adults. Iran has opened registration for potential candidates in its country's June presidential election. That kicks off the race as uncertainty looms over Iran's tattered nuclear deal with world powers, and tensions remain high with the West. President Hassan Rouhani, who helped Tehran enter the 2015 nuclear deal, can't rule again due to 2 term limits after serving 2 4-year terms. China says it will add all synthetic cannabinoids to its list of banned drugs in what it describes as a first in the world to curb their manufacturing, trafficking, and abuse. It is the second time that the Chinese authorities have imposed a class-wide ban on a substance after all fentanyl-related drugs were controlled in 2019. Synthetic cannabinoids are human-made chemicals that act on the same brain receptors as the main active ingredient in marijuana. The U.S. says China is a key source of synthetic drugs, which are then shipped to users in the U.S. The British government plans to expand student loan programs to give all adults access to 4 years of university or job training throughout their lifetimes as part of a legislative program designed to help the UK recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The proposal will be part of the annual Queen's Speech at the ceremonial opening of the new session of Parliament. The speech is also expected to include proposals to revamp planning laws, to speed up construction of new homes, overhaul the asylum system, and require voters to show a photo ID before casting their ballots. The number of working-age people in China fell over the past decade, while the population barely grew, adding to strains on an aging society. A once-a-decade government census found the total population rose to 1.41 billion people last year, up 72 million from 2010. Weak growth fell closer to zero as fewer couples had children. That adds to challenges for Chinese leaders who want to create a prosperous society and increase their global influence by developing new industries and self-sustaining economic growth based on consumer spending. The head of a UN team investigating atrocities in Iraq says it has found clear and compelling evidence that Islamic State extremists committed genocide against the Yazidi minority in 2014. Karim Khan also says the militant group successfully developed chemical weapons and used mustard gas. Mr. Khan told the UN Security Council on Monday that the team also concluded war crimes were committed by the IS group against predominantly Shiite unarmed cadets and the personnel from the Tikrit Air Academy. The gunman attacked a school in the Russian city of Kazan this morning, and Russian officials say 9 people have been killed, 7 8th-grade students, a teacher, and a school worker. They also say 21 others have been hospitalized with wounds. Tatarstan's governor said the shooter was 19 and has been arrested. Russian media said some students were able to escape the building during the attack, while others were trapped inside, but that security has been restored. The World Health Organization is again calling for a more equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says the continued disparity of vaccine distribution between wealthy and less wealthy countries remains one of the biggest hurdles in ending the pandemic. Conversely, low and lower middle-income countries make up 47% of the global population, but have received just 17% of available vaccines. A Romanian landmark long associated with the stake through the heart is now offering a jab in the arm. The Transylvanian castle, believed to be the inspiration for Bram Stoker's 19th century novel Dracula, is the backdrop of a COVID-19 vaccination center. Romanian officials say vaccination marathons will be held just outside the storied 14th century hilltop castle every weekend through May. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow us on our social media handles. We'll see you next time.